Welcome back, Ben. This is your homecoming.
Good to be back, Danny. Cheers, man. Thanks for the invite.
It was about a year ago I had you in here, and then since then you've been on Joe Rogan, you've been on Flagrant. What other podcasts have you been on?
There have been a few. I think those were mostly the big in-studio ones.
Yeah.
Was Rogan and Andrew Schultz's Flagrant, which was hilarious, actually. That was a lot of fun. And I was on Rogan with Jimmy. That was a great opportunity. I enjoyed that, although it's a bit of a blur in my head at this point. But I've been on a few others, just on like Zoom and the remote style ones. So yeah, but you were the first guy the first in-studio podcast. So.
Well, cool, man. I'm happy to inspire those guys to discover you. I mean, I'm sure they already. I know Rogan already knew about you. He'd already seen videos of your stuff.
I think so. Yeah.
But you've been all over the place too. You just got back from Turkey, I think, recently.
England, Turkey earlier this year, and then England. I came back from England a couple of weeks back. First chance to visit sort of the megalithic structures there, the stone circles, the museums, things like that. You could spend months in the British Isles. There's so much to see there. I definitely want to go back.
Yeah.
But Turkey earlier in the year.
So what were you doing in Turkey? Where'd you go? You went to Göbekli Tepe?
We did. So we did. I did a couple of weeks in southeastern Turkey. So in that Göbekli Tepe region, it's all centered around the city of Şanlıurfa, which is the biblical Odessa. It's the city of prophets. It's a city that goes back thousands of years. I mean, there's been occupation there since Neolithic times. It's a really interesting city. It's sort of Abrahamic traditions there. A lot of the legends from books of the faith that now are Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. A lot of the events that happen in those religions are all centered in that area. It's it was part of like the Silk Road, the northern-ish end of what was Mesopotamia back in the day. So it's an ancient place.
Yo, big Moonraker,
really
what's up, bro?
City, a lot of fun. I wasn't sure what to expect. It was my first time in Turkey, and different to Egypt, I'd say. It was a really nice place, and the timing. I don't know what happens with me in travel, man. Trying to even get over here, we had the hurricane, but man, I have the worst luck with travel because they had the earthquakes earlier in this year. Those
Fucking
big
amazing.
earthquakes
Whatever, I need to watch my back.
You're like at least. I mean, I think the government estimates they said something like 50,000 people. The guys that I knew on the ground there who were.
For good answer, yeah, really. I reinstalled
my guy there,
OBS,
Ramzan,
so it's a
who
fresh
lost his
OBS
home.
install.
He was
Hopefully
snowfall down. He was living out of his
that
car.
solves everything. Got a new
Staff
fan
was
for
out
my
fucking
computer
villages,
too. I just rearranged everything.
trying
I
to help
got
people
like a
to
mini
sort of
desk
recover from it.
here.
But he said it was probably more like
Not a desk, but like something to hold my chat and my
from,
like stuff.
if you include Syria, because it's
We're
right
stepping
next to
on.
the Syrian border, and there was a lot of Syria that was affected as well. But yeah, so that happened, and they're like, man, so the city itself of Şanlıurfa wasn't the infrastructure was still up, the roads were okay, a few buildings fell down. Some of the other cities were impacted much more. And then they had these rains, they had these floods, which were almost unprecedented floods in that region. It just poured down, and there were people that died in Şanlıurfa purely because they didn't have anywhere to live, and they were in these tents, and they got sort of washed into these alcoves and carried away in these floods, and a bunch of people died. So I was like, man, and all this happened within the couple of weeks, and I guess around the month leading up to it. So we were like, geez, are we going to do it? And he was like, yeah, we can do it. And we sort of reassured the people that were coming with us, we can make it happen, and we did. Unfortunately, obviously places like the museum, they have this wonderful museum in Şanlıurfa where a lot of the artifacts from Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, like all of the recent archaeological finds there are housed in this museum, but it was they had to evacuate it because of the floods. They basically boxed up, I don't know, like 100,000 artifacts or something and shipped them off, so we couldn't get into the museum. But also as a consequence, it did make the place green. Like normally if you see pictures of that region, it's brown, but we were there, it was just breathtakingly beautiful. Like these limestone hills were just breaking out in wildflowers and grass, and everywhere we went, it was just gorgeous. And of course, the sites there are just incredible. They go back forever. There's Göbekli Tepe, which was everyone I think who is interested in this field should know something about Göbekli Tepe. It's the site that was, it was originally discovered in the 1950s. I think there were some farmers, or they saw the tops of what it turned out to be these big T-pillars sticking out of the ground on this side of a hill. I think it translates to pot-bellied hill in that language, and they sort of dismissed it as being, they thought, well, no, this is a relatively modern cemetery or something. Like it's not you know, it's not that stonework was too good to be considered very ancient, and it wasn't until the mid 1990s when the German Archaeological Institute and Klaus Schmidt, who sadly passed away since then, began to excavate at Göbekli Tepe, and that's when they found, okay, yeah, so this is actually tremendously ancient. It does have some very unique stonework, including megalithic work. You've got, you know, T-pillars that are 18 feet tall and 20 plus tons. And it's a very large site. It's all of these stone circles, these pillars that are encompassed by more of a loose or rough stone walls, and it spreads out. It's quite large. There's a number of them. They only excavated maybe 10% of that site. And it shook the world up because they based on some of the material that they found in that dig, they pretty much conclusively dated that thing to about 11,000 years old, which is much older than any previously recorded, you know, evidence of civilization or of this type of occupation. So going there was a really interesting experience. People have said for a long time that it was deliberately buried. The work and the research and the science on this is slowly changing. They're starting to move away from this idea that it was deliberately buried. It may just have been layers of sediment that have built up over time. There might have been some periods of burying it. In fact, if you tried to bury it deliberately, it would have taken years and years and years. It's a huge site. But what was interesting to me, you know, researching this site, is that if you look at the picture of it, this is a good picture of it. I have some photos too, but this works. Is that you have two styles of architecture here. You have the megalithic work, the T-pillars, and it's not, you know, it's not just the pillars here. They would actually cut down to the bedrock. You see that area around the T-pillars. It's when you go there, it looks like cement. It's not cement. It's actually I believe, limestone bedrock that they've lapped down to be flat. So you have these huge, big flat areas, and they inset these stones into them, or some of them are set up on pedestals like that central one. And these T-pillars are, a lot of them, they're not all complete. They're some of them are broken. They have the most amazing high relief artwork on them. By that, it's you know, it means you're carving away the negative space to make the figures and the symbols pop out at you. Like
Right.
Yeah. And see, and that's a good example of that image there of that one stone. Yeah, if you look at that, so you see how the walls around it kind of encompass those stones.
Mm-hmm.
Like they actually cover up some of the features, and you can clearly tell the walls seem like they've been built to reinforce these stone circles, to sort of preserve them almost. And looking at the walls, and this is also true at another site we'll talk about, Karahan Tepe. Inside the walls, there's actually pieces of broken pillars have been used as material in the building of the walls. And the material, or the organic matter that they've used to date the site to give it that 11,000-year-old age, came from inside these walls. So it's like, to me, I look at that, it's two different architectural styles. I think it is potentially indicative of two entirely different periods of occupation and building, because these walls are quite primitive. It's local stone, and they're actually using pieces of broken pillars, which means that those pillars could have been there for who knows how long, actually fallen over. Some of them might have broken, and they've been encompassed and used in these walls that were then used to sort of resurrect or renew or renovate the site and protect these pillars. So do we know if it's 11,000 year old? I think that's kind of the earliest date for it, the youngest date. It could be vastly older than that. We really don't know.
And you said there's a bunch of this that's still under the ground?
Heaps of it, yeah. So they've kind of excavated on one side of a hill, and that's where the UNESCO, like the World Heritage Site, is now. Mm. They've put a big cover over the top of it. It's actually great. Like, yeah, see the walkway there? There's this big. They want to keep the rain off it. I think when it does rain, if they left it out in the weather, it'd just get really muddy, and you know, it'd just wash away a lot of the sediment. It's a great way to view the site. It'd be lovely to get down in there, but they get a lot of traffic. Like, this has become a major tourist attraction for that part of Turkey now. A lot of people want to see this, and they've built a big visitor centre, and so it's a nice way to view the site. And if you have a camera with a zoom lens, you can kind of see a lot of the detail.
Oh wow, that's incredible, that negative relief.
Yeah, the high relief. And there's, you know, lots of interesting studies that have been done on Göbekli Tepe. Martin Sweatman, who I've talked about, he was presenting at the Cosmic Summit recently as well. I've talked with him on my channel. He wrote a book called Prehistory Decoded, and he contends that Göbekli Tepe is something of a celestial calendar. He uses a method of statistical analysis that shows that it's extremely likely that's what it is. He's looking at the figures relating to, you know, precession and constellations in the sky, and that it, when looked at through his analysis, it seems to mark, you know, interesting events that we know sort of happened, like periods like the Younger Dryas, because this site dates back to the Younger Dryas, and had there been, you know, this comet or these impacts or these fragments of things coming from the sky, that's probably something they would have noticed. He wrote a whole book on this. It's a very interesting theory. He gets attacked pretty hard on the basis of it, I think, from a lot of people that don't really understand the nature of statistics and how that works. He actually wrote there's a peer-reviewed paper that you can read if you're interested in kind of diving into his research or his detail. There's other studies that have been done also that are interesting on the geometry of the site. So there's, not only do you have you have these stone circles, which the circles themselves, and this is true also at Karahan Tepe, have interesting alignment. So they align to, you know, a lot of them may well have been used as solar observatories or potentially lunar observatories. So there's alignments on the site that point to significant periods like solstices, equinoxes, lunar events. But there's actually a geometric arrangement between the circles themselves at Göbekli Tepe. So they form like equilateral triangles, I think. There's been some studies done that shows that there was a very deliberate layout plan of how these stone circles were formed. So it was fascinating. And not, you know, so Göbekli Tepe was obviously a highlight, but what I didn't know on this trip was the fact that, okay, I knew about Karahan Tepe, so that's another site that's nearby. It's actually pretty close. There was a site that was very recently discovered. It's an active archaeological site now. I believe the University of Istanbul is excavating there. It's another stone circle site. It's similar architecture to Göbekli Tepe. You have huge T-pillars, but it's something like 10 times larger than Göbekli Tepe. And they've only just sort of scratched the surface at Karahan. They're still digging, and we had special permission to go in there and look around the site. And you can literally look at these beautiful hills with flowers on them, and just poking up everywhere are the tops of T-pillars. You just see this tiny little top of it, and you can clearly see it's a T-pillar, and there's something buried under here. And there might be as many as 1,000 T-pillars on this site. It's at least 5 times or more, I think, larger than Göbekli Tepe. And it's at least 500 years older based on the dating of material that they found so far. Which, it's kind of funny because when they built a visitor center at Göbekli Tepe, they called it like the 0 point in history. This was the brand name that it gave you. You go in, there's big light shows and these, you know, big wall-to-wall sort of cinematic experiences to look at the site. But it's like, well, I guess that makes Karahan Tepe 0 point minus 500 or something like this. Wow. Right, it's even older. And I actually was out there like 3-4 times during the 2 weeks. It's a wonderful site. I could probably even pull up images if you want to see them. But it's, they're just starting to excavate. And you see a similar thing. In fact, at Karahan, there's evidence of domiciles. So one of the controversies about Göbekli Tepe is this civilization, right? Because technically, if you go look at, and I guess this is more along the orthodox line of thinking, the date for civilization hasn't really changed. We're still saying, well, 6,000 years ago, you know, Sumerians and Mesopotamia, that was the start. But when I look at a place like Göbekli Tepe or Karahan Tepe, that screams civilization to me. Right? The theory is, it's purely ceremonial. You know, it was what happened, and this sort of came out with the Michael Shermer, Graham Hancock and Randall Carlson podcast on the JRE. It's a well-known one. I mean, they've essentially just changed the definition of hunter-gatherers to now not just be, well, no, this is not just, we're not just out hunter and gathering, but on the weekends, I guess, when the men want to get away from the women and the kids or something, they'd like to, you know, participate in a little bit of megalithic stone building and things like this, and, you know, building these 20-ton T-pillars. It's insane. But, you know, there's infrastructure on these sites. They're massive. There's cisterns, there's quarries, there are other structures at Karahan Tepe. There's actually evidence for domiciles and permanent housing, which is another indication of sort of settlement and civilization. And I just look at the scale and scope of what is on these sites, and it's like that's not something you do on the side. Like this requires specialization, right? So for people to be able to specialize in doing this type of stonework, this type of a logistical endeavor, the artwork that's required to carve these things, you need to have infrastructure around you. That means there's other people collecting food, there's other people doing things. Like, it's that organization that essentially defines civilization. I think just the scale and scope of the work requires that. So I think it's kind of ridiculous that we don't consider this civilization. And the nail in the coffin for me, and this is something I learned on that trip, is that it's not only is there Karahan and Göbekli Tepe, but there's between 40 and 80 more sites that they've discovered just like that.
Around that area?
Around that area in southeastern Turkey, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of other well-known sites, Sogmatar and other places, but these tepes and these T-pillared stone circles, they're doing a lot of ground penetrating radar and that type of thing, and they've discovered somewhere between 40 and 80, and I think they want to open up like 15 of them for tourism. And that's like, at that point, you know, it's a huge civilization. It requires a big population of people, and it's civilization. I mean, it's like a lost chapter of human civilization that we really know nothing about. Like, we've got some artifacts and we've got some indication, but it's to me, it's just a whole lost chapter of our history in this region.
Who are the organizations involved in doing some of this ground penetrating radar and like discovering more of these sites?
Well, a lot of it is happening locally with the universities in Turkey.
Oh, okay.
Istanbul, I mean, they're excavating, I believe it's the University of Istanbul is excavating at Karahan. Who was doing Göbekli? Well, German Archaeological Institute was the one working at Göbekli Tepe. It's, you know, the way these projects get dealt out and the way that digs happen and sort of institutions get involved there's no regular process. It's like a negotiation process. I assume it's, you know, some academic institution somewhere in the world wants to go and dig somewhere, and it's a negotiation with the government to get the permissions, and then they kind of get to run the site. And then at places like Göbekli Tepe, when UNESCO gets involved, that's a whole other set of things. You see the same thing in Egypt. Like, there's various, you have the British in one area, you have, you know, the French in another area, you have the Germans in another area, you have the Egyptians themselves doing a lot of work in different areas. So it's a case-by-case basis almost about who actually does the work and then publishes. Certainly in Egypt, any publishing of findings has to be done in close concert with the Department of Antiquities, formerly the Supreme Council of Antiquities. So they essentially control the release of information. So people that have seen things like the recent, you know, Scan Pyramids project and that sort of data, when they found that new chamber in the Great Pyramid and stuck a little camera in there to take a look, that was all released by the Department of Antiquities in Egypt, in partnership with the people that were actually doing the work.
When did they find a new chamber in the Great Pyramid?
Oh, you haven't heard this? So, well, it's been going on for a couple of years now. There's been the Scan Pyramids project is what it's called. They're essentially using muon cosmology, or it's basically cosmic ray detection. So they put all these sensors, and I've seen them a bunch of times because I've been into the pyramid over this period of time several times. And down in the subterranean chamber, there's like a rack full of gear, and there's these boxes up on the Grand Gallery and in the Queen's Chamber, like the parts that you can't normally get to, that average tourist won't be able to get to. You need to like book a special permission to see. There's a lot of this infrastructure. And so what they're doing is there's these, you know, cosmic rays and muons, in this case, are passing through, you know, they pass through material, they pass through stone and everything like that. But there is a sort of a very slight difference when they pass through material versus a void. So they put these detectors in there and they leave them for a couple of years, and they've got them on the outside as well. So they're measuring it kind of from all these different angles, and putting all that data together and crunching it has let them kind of put together a rough picture of where they think there are voids inside the pyramid. Right, so these are like empty spaces. And one of them was a small empty space above the main entrance. So the main entrance is above where we go in today. So today when you visit the pyramid, you go up on that north side and you enter in through what's known as Al-Mamun's Hole, or Mamun's Hole. It's supposedly been hammered by the Caliph Al-Mamun, and he sort of hammered through the limestone superstructure of the pyramid, and he hit the junction between the ascending and descending passageway.
Okay.
But up above that, and you can see that in those chevron blocks. So the descending passageway actually goes all the way up to a doorway that's below those two triangle-shaped chevron blocks in that center top picture. Yeah, that one. So there's a doorway there. That's considered the original main entrance to the pyramid. Now this was all in antiquity still cased over, so this wasn't visible. At some point it was certainly opened in antiquity. El Mamoon wasn't the first one in there. But it's actually where the void is above that, sort of behind those chevrons. There's a small chamber, and they either drilled a hole or they found a space where they could stick a little tube in and then put one of those little snake cameras in there, and they had a look around, and sure enough there's this space, and it was a big this scientist revealed hidden corridor. I mean, this is this little chamber, and it's got these chevron blocks. It's like those chevron blocks keep going back into the superstructure of the pyramid, and it doesn't seem to go anywhere. But we don't know that, because often some of these passages would be blocked up. That was certainly the case with the ascending passageway that comes off the descending passageway has these big granite plug blocks in it. But the really interesting part of this Scanned Pyramids project is that they found a massive void in the pyramid. A really large void. Like, this is a tiny little space that they've looked at, but if you've seen the layout of the pyramid in the area above the Grand Gallery, it's kind of above and I think a little bit to the right. They've found indication for what is just a huge chamber. Now it's something like 40 meters long.
Which one is the Grand Gallery there?
So it's that large angled piece on the right. See it's the one that's just to the right of the King's Chamber. It's the angled down like.
Oh, I see it. Okay, towards the top.
Yeah. So it connects so the descending passageway is the passageway that goes down to. That kind of isn't to scale, that picture.
Right. Okay.
Not even actually. I don't know. That's not the architecture for the pyramid. Mm-hmm. That's Pharaoh Osmosis. That's a completely sort of Yeah, that's not the actual pyramid.
Okay.
That's like there's a lot of chambers that aren't there on that map. But it's a huge. Yeah, that's probably.
Oh, that's a thick diagram.
Yeah, this is probably a little closer to reality.
Is it obvious to you when you go in the pyramids that these things were made for people to walk through?
No, not at all. It doesn't feel at all that way. I actually think I don't think they were made for humans, put it that way. And I don't think they were tombs either. They certainly, I mean, this would not have been an easy space to take some sort of formal procession of Pharaoh's body into these places. It's ridiculously difficult to move around in them today, and we've added steps and handrails. It's a difficult exercise for anyone. Just the passages are like 3.5 feet high and feet square. So you do this pyramid crouch thing. They're on a pretty steep angle, going up and down. The longest passage is like 300 feet or something. The descending passageway that goes down to the subterranean chamber, and it's quite an exercise getting out of there. And I can only imagine how difficult that might have been without the modern steps and handrails that were put in there to help people. It's not an easy task at all. And then you get into spaces like the Grand Gallery. I mean, that thing there's so many indications in there that had some sort of function. It's outrageous. There's all these slots on the side of the walls. It's as if there was a mechanism moving up and down. I know there's architects and proposals that suggest this was almost like a sliding lever room that they would use to haul blocks up and do things like this. I'm not convinced. Chris Dunn has his theories about that those slots might have been used to house like series of Helmholtz resonators that were part of this whole pyramid machine that he proposes. I'm interested in any functional take on it. I don't have one personally. I get the indication from being in there that it feels like a machine, man. It feels like you're walking around in the guts of a machine. It's just what it feels like. It doesn't feel like it's meant for humans. You can see the stairs and the handrails on this, but this is the Grand Gallery.
Oh, wow.
It's like...
How big is that?
It's huge. It's probably about 40 meters long, and God, it must be 4 or 5 meters tall at the very top. It steps up. It has that stepped sort of, it narrows as it goes taller. And along the edges of the walls you have these slots. At the very bottom of it you go straight, and that goes to the chamber, the Queen's Chamber. And at the top you go straight through an antechamber and then into the granite structure known as the King's Chamber. So the void that they found, however, is actually above this, and it's equivalent in size, so more or less equivalent. It's something like 40 meters long, 4 meters wide, and potentially 4 meters tall. They're not quite sure if it's angled or if it's straight, but and they kind of proved their mechanism and their procedure with the first void. Like they did their scans and they said there's probably a void right here, and this one's right, near the front entrance. And sure enough, they drill a hole in there, they stick their little camera in there, and like, there it is. We found this void. So there's a very, very high likelihood that there's a void there. There's an undiscovered chamber inside the Great Pyramid. So who knows what that will reveal, and I very much hope that if it is explored or plumbed, or they drill into it to take a look, that it's data that's shared with everybody, because it feels like this is, everybody's history in this monument.
Now, when you were at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey and some of these other sites, Karahan Tepe, are there any rocks or stones that show any of these machining marks that you found in Egypt? For all the time that we have been alive, the US dollar has been the primary currency, but that may not be the case for much longer. China is set to dethrone the dollar, and possibly much sooner than you think. And even the world's biggest economies are already ditching the dollar for the yen, collapsing the US currency, causing unprecedented inflation and crashing markets. And if that wasn't enough, this paves the way for the government to take total control over all of your money with a new digital dollar. Now is the time to take total control of your money and not let your life savings become a casualty of the currency wars. And you can do it using the only precious metal dealer that I trust, American Hartford Gold. They will show you how to protect your savings and retirement accounts by diversifying your wealth portfolio into physical gold and silver, with the finest products, amazing customer service, and a buyback commitment. But you don't have to take my word for it. American Hartford Gold has a 5-star rating from thousands of reviews and an A+ from the Better Business Bureau. American Hartford Gold supports content like this that is committed to bringing you the truth. And if you tell them I sent you, they will give you $5,000 in free silver on your first order. So call them now. Click on the link in the description or call 855-679-1326. That's 855-679-1326, or text CONCRETE, KONCRETE, to 65532. Again, the phone number is 855-679-1326, or text CONCRETE to 65532. Now back to the show.
Not at those sites that I've seen. No. Okay. It's definitely. I mean, you don't see the same sort of advanced, what I would term the signs of advanced technology that you see in places like Egypt and Peru, for that matter, and in other areas, Baalbek. But I didn't see that on these sites. There's certainly some very significant achievements, but it is in my estimation all things that can be done with primitive methodologies. I mean, at Karahan Tepe, there's still a stone that's in a quarry. It's a T-pillar that's been cut out. It probably weighs around 30 tons. I mean, so that's doable. There's flint everywhere. Like, that's the other thing. You see when you're looking around on the ground, there's flint chips everywhere. I can probably pull up some pictures of it. Yeah, we would just, on the site, particularly at Karahan, you can find all of these chippings and little flint, either arrows or pieces that have come off, chisels or blades. And it's all worked flint. You can tell it's all been mapped. Found dozens of them, and just pick them up, take a photo, throw them down. But yeah, there's a big T-pillar still in a quarry that's attached. I mean, it's a difficult thing to do, but logistically, sure, you can move 30-ton loads. That said, there are other sites in Turkey that do. I have not visited them yet. I think there's one called, it's Zanaki Tepe. It's kind of hard to say, but it looks very much classical, sort of megalithic, matches the stuff in Egypt. I've seen photos of tube drills and other indications, and it would take more investigation to see, well, is this specifically something that needs, some sort of advanced tech to do? I'm pretty careful about specifically what I say is like, well, this can or can't be done, with primitive methodologies. Yeah. It's very specific signatures in stone. It's particular achievements, and it's things like precision that we've measured, not just eyeballed, stuff like that. And I also classify like the massive logistical challenges over say 250, 400, 1,000 tons. I don't think we've answered the question or satisfied the statement that can all be done with primitive methods. Like I think you can do that, and people have demonstrated moving large loads up to 100, 150 tons, maybe even 200 tons. I don't know, but at some point to me there's a line I don't know if it's at like 300 or 400. I mean, anything above, for sure above 400 tons, I'm really starting to question that this can be done with purely primitive methodologies, particularly those attributed to the dynastic Egyptians in this case, because, you know, the Romans could do a lot of things, but the Romans used pulleys and capstans, and they had metal, they had steel, they had a lot more capability than what we know the dynastic Egyptians had. Remember, in the Old Kingdom, and for a lot of that civilization, they had no use of the wheel. There's no evidence for pulleys use. They didn't use capstans. They didn't use force multipliers. They literally had like wooden levers, sleds, ropes, and human horsepower. There's no evidence they even used animals to haul stuff around. So that's very much a different challenge when you're talking about gigantic, single-piece objects that weigh 1,000 tons or more, of which there is evidence for many. And in fact, I think there's evidence that stones of this size were even being removed from quarries prior to the pre-dynastic civilization. I think there's strong evidence for that in the Aswan quarry. It's a new area of it that I.
When was the pre-dynastic? When was pre-dynastic?
So the
give us like the rough timeline.
Well, here I can actually show it to you.
Okay, perfect. And Cleopatra was in the most recent.
She was the last.
She was the last, right?
Last, yeah.
And I don't remember where I saw this, but Cleopatra is actually closer to us than to.
Indeed, the building of the Great Pyramid.
The building of the Great Pyramid.
Yeah. So this here gives you an idea. So, you know, you're talking about a little earlier than 3000 BC. So around 3150 is more or less the date where you have Menes, the first pharaoh of the first dynasty.
So like 5,000 years ago.
Yeah, a little more even. That was, so anything prior to that is what you would call pre-dynastic times.
Okay.
And there's a few cultures that we associate with that, the Nadak culture, several others. It's a very interesting time because we get a lot of very interesting artifacts that come from that time. Things like, you know, precision-made stone vases, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
But that's the early, it's what's known as the early period, the first couple of dynasties. You know, then, sort of 2700 BC or thereabouts, we get into what's known as the Old Kingdom. This is the famous period. I love studying this period. It's probably my favorite period. This is where the mega pyramids come in. This is the huge granite works of, you know, the Valley Temple, the Sphinx is in here. All of this stuff, it happens in the Old Kingdom.
This is where mainstream archaeologists believe that this is when they believe the pyramids and the Sphinx were made.
Yeah, they date this. So the pyramids are all dated to a reign or a family. In fact, the people don't realize this. It's like the stone pyramids, the massive stone pyramids. All of them. I mean, just in Giza alone, those three pyramids supposedly were built in a period less than 100 years together, like with success, because you had this is the Orthodox time frame. You had Khufu, then you had his son, possibly his brother, I think, Khafre built the middle pyramid, and then Menkaure, who might have been his son. So you got these successive generations that apparently built these pyramids. And if you go back a little bit to include the other massive stone pyramids that are attributed to one guy, Sneferu, who was the first pharaoh, I think, of the 4th dynasty. You know, he has 3 pyramids. He has the massive pyramid there's at Maidun, which is just a huge structure. There's the bent pyramid, which is, probably the best preserved, at least the exterior structure is the bent pyramid. The casing stones are all locked together, and then most of them are still in place. And then the red pyramid. So the bent pyramid and the red pyramid are at a place called Dashur, and they're about the same size as the middle pyramid. So very these are the same sort of achievements. So if you take all of those stone pyramids, they were all supposedly built in just like a 150-year period according to the Orthodox timeline. It's kind of silly. And if you in Sneferu alone, I have a video on Sneferu. There's so many questions. Like, they never found him. They didn't find any burials. This is the same story, right? No inscriptions, no burials, no remains in these pyramids. And why does a pharaoh need 3 pyramids? They kind of go, well, you know, he kind of stuffed up on the bent pyramid and didn't get it right, so, you know, it has this angle change to it, which was a mistake, which is complete nonsense. You don't make, you know, these things aren't made up as they go along. And then they go, well, then he did the red pyramid. He was probably buried in the red pyramid. It's like, what does he need 3 pyramids? And if he did
oh my gosh,
pyramids, I did the math at one point. It's in the video. I think it was like over a 25 or even 40-year period. I think you had to have cut and installed.
Yo, what's up, Irie? Thanks, bro.
Tons of stone every day.
Thanks, man.
For that entire
Appreciate that, man.
to build those 3. That's
what's up,
finished.
dude?
Like,
in 40 years.
in 40 years, I think, something like that.
They're not real creatures, just part of imaginative storytelling.
In a period of 25
years.
It's
so positive. I love the vocabulary it uses.
This explanation for how
Yo, what's up, Irie? How are you, man?
Constrained by
Yo, congrats on being LTK champ again. Hell yeah. The LTK champ is in the chat.
And of course, you want to build your pyramid while you're alive. You want to be buried in it. The next guy to come along may not finish that for you. He might take it off you. Who knows what, right? So they go for Khufu.
Thank you. Yo, man, this is great, man. Train 2 something? That's crazy, dude.
With that thing with, 2.5
LTK train 236 or whatever? That's crazy.
It up, and it's something like, 5 to 6 million tons. It's one block, quarried, cut, transported, dressed, finished, put in place, complete every 5 minutes. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year.
What's the average weight of those blocks?
About 2.5 tons. With blocks ranging up to like 60, 70 plus tons, like the granite blocks in its core. A good example, I love this story. I use it in one of the videos that I have on looking at this sort of the
hey buddy, I appreciate you being here. Congrats on the move. Congrats on the championship.
This was shown in the Revelations of the Pyramids.
Happy for you, man.
Documentary made by a good friend of mine, Patrice Poyard. Fantastic film. But there was a quarry in France. Like they dug.
Your room looks nice and big and comfy.
Stone or something like this big pit, and it was roughly the same volume as the Great Pyramid of Giza. And they used it. There's a big hole in the ground, and they're like, all right, well, we finished quarrying or we finished doing this, so we just use this for a dump, for like material, like rock or whatever from these building sites. So they would literally just dump truck, they'd just back up with this, whatever, dirt, digging material from other sites and just dump into it. 24 hours a day is just one operation. And all these construction projects, they just drive trucks up and just dump into it. It took them 12 years to fill it. By dumping into it with modern dump trucks, 24 hours a day, all the time, 12 years just to fill that space. And you're trying to tell me that in 25 years you're building what is still one of the most precisely made structures on the planet in terms of alignment, the incredible precision that is exhibited in the stonework on the inside, the orientation of the entire structure you've got. And not included in that figure, by the way, and not for nothing, is the bedrock. I mean, you've probably got years of planning, right, just to survey it and plan and design this thing. Then they actually had to level the bedrock, and they had to get down to a point. They didn't level it entirely. There is a primordial mound sort of thing in the middle, which is another interesting fact that relates to a lot of other sites. But it sits on tiles. There are foundation tiles around this pyramid, some of them weighing 200 to 250 tons. So a lot of people walk up and look at the pyramid, but make sure you look down at your feet. You're walking on something that was constructed before they ever laid the first stone down to build the pyramid. So all of that's probably taken years as well, and then you've got to go through this process of actually constructing the thing and finishing it, because the inside, they definitely use mortar, and there's it's not you wouldn't call it like super precise, most of the superstructure, but the exterior casing stones were incredibly well made, as was a lot of the structures on the inside. The whole massive granite structure that's in the center that is the King's Chamber is part of, and is what is above it. There's like 5 or 6 chambers above it, all made out of granite. So yeah, all of this happens in the Old Kingdom. So you go from there, you have these intermediate periods. They're essentially periods when there's civil unrest, or there's a disconnection between Upper and Lower Egypt. There's something happens to disrupt the kind of the unity of Egypt. The Middle Kingdom runs from dynasties 11 to 14. Another intermediate period, the New Kingdom. That's a relatively famous period. You have guys like Ramses II, Merenptah, Seti I. Notorious pharaohs, and this is actually an age of great power for the dynastic Egyptian civilization. They were very rich, very powerful during this period. Another third intermediate period, you have a late period, then you have what's called the Ptolemaic period, which is essentially the Greek-Roman period. And then the civilization, as we know it, comes to an end with Cleopatra, who famously commits suicide around 30 BCE. So, yeah, that statement that she's closer to us than to the building of the Great Pyramids is true. Like, it's just under 2,000 years since Cleopatra killed herself, but you have to go back, 2.5 plus like 2,700 years almost to the building of the pyramids. So
To the official building.
and that's the official date of the pyramid.
Right. Which we
No way, I did not know
speculated that it's been a lot.
that Cleopatra
it was a lot earlier than that, right?
passed
I
herself away.
Question the dating.
I didn't know that.
Of the pyramids. I think.
It's wild.
I mean, it's a difficult thing to say, purely because you're looking at the skeletal remains of something that's probably been worked on and renovated and reused and just. I mean, I'm sure the dynastic Egyptians were working
With the
on
snake? No way, really? Are you serious? We gotta ask the droid. We gotta confirm that.
Particularly the Great Pyramid, because that's the one we've studied the most. But actually, most of them. Obviously, you have the logistical issues with the timeline that I talked about. I think these were multi-generational projects. They must have to be.
No freaking way. That's terrible.
How long
That's so terrible.
Build,
That's like when I found out that Socrates.
They take a long time.
You know what happened to Socrates?
The problem I have with them is
So
the
sad.
precision and the knowledge that's encoded in them. Like, I think any honest analysis of
You
the
don't?
pyramids
Oh my
leaves you in
God.
a position where
Dude,
you have no choice but to reevaluate
Droid,
and rewrite
what
history. You either end up and
happened
go, okay,
to
dynastic Egyptians built them,
Socrates
right? In that
at
case,
the
they had
end
far
of
more
his
capability
life?
Right.
and far more knowledge than we've ever attributed to them, right? I think I've talked before about the fact that you have the dimensions of the
Bro.
Earth encoded into the pyramid, right? It's
That's
essentially a scale of the northern hemisphere.
Dude.
There seems to be
And, like, Plato
specific
writes
information
about
the
it.
fact that the
I think in
Earth's
the Republic.
an oblate spheroid.
I haven't read
It's
it.
longer around the
Who was telling me about
equatorial
it?
circumference than it is the
Goodle
polar
Shoes
circumference.
was telling me about it.
The grid of latitude and longitude, like that ratio, of the fact that we're slightly longer east to west than we are north to south. That
So the
ratio,
haters,
you knock it
man.
out on like
The haters have been
grid of
around
latitude
for
and
like
longitude.
at
They're
least 2,000
squares.
years,
They're not really squares; they're rectangular.
right? Those are the original haters.
Because the way the Earth's shaped, the latitude lines are shorter than the longitude
That's
lines.
right.
So if you take a square unit, basically out of the Earth, starting at the equator,
It's not gonna work.
it would be wider than it is tall, and
That's
if
right.
you
What is
scale it
this?
down, it is like
not gonna
within
work.
inches, the exact size.
Yeah, I have it here. Let me grab it here. Pyramid stuff. It's actually called. This is it here. So it kind of starts here. This is where that ratio is encoded. It's in something
Okay,
called
right.
the socle,
Yes.
which is essentially a cubit high. It's like a little think of it as like a little platform the pyramid sits on, which gives you two ways to measure its perimeter, right? You can measure the perimeter based on the perimeter of the socle or the perimeter of the actual pyramid, and then so this is exactly what you're talking about. So 1/4 of 1 minute of latitude at the equator on the Earth is 3,022.9 feet. A quarter of a minute of longitude is slightly longer at 43.5 feet. And then so the perimeter length of the pyramid without the socle is 0.2 of a foot off, and this is 0.1 of a foot off, being exactly that same ratio. So you have latitude and longitude. You have the dimensionality of the planet. This, which is Randall mentioned this the other day. It's we didn't really get an accurate understanding of that until we had satellite surveys and we did space observations in the 1980s.
There's been some pretty good paintings of it. If you Google it,
idea of this
there's some pretty good
the more accurate we became,
Renaissance
the closer we got to
paintings
the
of it.
pyramid numbers. You know what I'm saying? Like
And
we
like Baroque
understood,
style
started to learn actually the pyramid
paintings,
very
pretty good.
accurately encodes this data. You sort of have some other things on the pyramid, like it has that ratio of 4:3:2. This is one of those cosmically
Really
significant
captures
numbers
the
that's in
moment.
that pantheon of very interesting astronomical numbers, and it's at a scale of 43,200. It essentially replicates the Earth. You multiply the height of the Great Pyramid by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. You multiply the base perimeter of it by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth.
This was coming up a lot yesterday with Randall when
Yeah.
he was explaining this plasmoid generator type thing and how the dimensions of the tubes and the sphere and the thunderbolt generator are. It starts at 4 inches, then it goes to 3, then it goes to 2.
Yeah.
That is used like throughout that whole mechanism, which is
Yeah, there's a lot of these numbers tend to repeat in lots of different ways, and Randall's a complete master at showing it all. But that's why I say that I think And other people have argued that the speed of light's encoded in it, and there's obviously all this precision stonework.
You know what I might try some attempts of?
And it's a logistical achievement.
Surface
like no
2 Secret Agent
relatively modern times.
for sub 1 minute.
So I think
just strafing and shooting at the thing, and then running and throwing the mine.
All they did.
I think I can do that.
Right, so you have to. It's either one or the other. But if you
I can
go
do
with
it
they
once.
did, then we need to reevaluate and rewrite history based on what it means and what information they have and their capabilities. And we vastly underestimated the dynastic Egyptians. They were far more capable. And where did they get this data from? And how did they know it? Like, that's a rewrite of history. And if they didn't make it, like, they for sure worked on it. But if there was something else here and this inspired them, then that's another picture. Like, who did then? Like, so that's.
I watched
Dynamics'
Dynamics'
concept of inheritance, and
Surface 2
this is
Secret
why
Agent
I'm
tutorial
a
today again.
Supporter of the lost ancient civilization hypothesis.
Really
is that
insightful,
I think
man.
The vast majority of evidence favors that answer. Like, I just think there is so much evidence of renovation and reuse and imitation. I think it's like I look at dynastic Egypt, and I think this idea of them being basically a giant cargo cult, the world's most advanced cargo cult, makes a lot of sense, because you've got to imagine the other problem with the pyramids is that, these are the first pyramids that were ever made. Right? They're like, that's at the very pointy end. Like, it's
The first ones were the best ones.
the first ones were the best. Yeah, the step pyramid's another story. I think that is dynastic. But then immediately after the step pyramid, you have these mighty, gigantic stone pyramids that were supposedly constructed. But they kept making pyramids after that. I mean, take a look at this. Like, so, it's to me, it's why I get this term, a tale of two industries. You have the earliest pyramids with these giant stone structures
What
that are still
was
standing
that?
today.
Why?
They kept building pyramids right through the Middle Kingdom. But they were making them from mud brick, and they were much smaller, and they were much less sophisticated. And they're today eroding away slowly because this is how they were made. It's like this technology just disappeared if they had it. And then they were trying to imitate these other pieces of these other works with mud bricks. And in fact, this has also supported this primitive methodology supported by scenes on the wall. Like, there is a scene of pyramid building, but it's mud bricks. It's in the Tomb of the Nobles on the west bank of the Nile.
How did they make the mud bricks?
Well, they'd put together these they'd bake them in the sun, or they might have baked them in ovens, and they'd make these big mud bricks, and then they'd transport them to, it's like straw or hay and mud, and you bake it, and you stick it in a mold, and you cook it. Geopolymer, people, that's probably what it is. It's a form of geopolymer. And then they'd stack them up, and they'd build it that way. And it's a process that continues to this day, people doing stuff that way. But that's how they built it. And so what's interesting to me is that this concept that, there's an advanced version of a particular thing, pyramids is one of them, and a primitive version of a particular thing that matches the tools and techniques that we know about, right? We know that they were relatively primitive. They didn't use the wheel. They used manpower. They used primitive tools like flint chisels and pounding stones and, wooden implements for this sort of stuff. And there's scenes on the wall that support it, right? So they showed us how they did it. That exact set of circumstances exists not only for pyramids, but it exists for vases, for columns, for boxes, for slabs. There's an advanced and then there's a primitive version of that. And I've been slowly trying to document that in detail over the last couple of years and look at each category of these and say, okay, so what matches the tools that we know they could use and the techniques that we know that they used and the stuff they drew on the walls that showed us how they did it versus the stuff that isn't explainable via those mechanisms. And so that's why I think when you look at these advanced things and you look at what the dynastic Egyptians were doing and you look at their own history and what they say about their past, all of a sudden this idea of inheritance, and a longer timeline, the fact that maybe they got a kickstart, when they finally came out of that Neolithic or Mesolithic Stone Age and they began civilization, they had enough people and they could organize and they might have started with all of these artifacts and objects. And and that's actually what they say too. Like, they trace their own history back some 36,000 years. Like, their origin stories with the time of Zep Tepi, when the gods walked the earth. They talk about the time of the Shemsu Horde, these mythical, demigod-like people with magical powers. All of these rulers, they have a king's list that goes back nearly, like I said, over 36,000 years, I think. And then it gets to the dynastic civilization at the end.
Who came up with the king's list?
Well, there's a couple different sources. There's there was an Egyptian priest called Menaeus that talked about it. The primary source for that is something called the Turin Papyrus. There's also a Sumerian king's list that's different. It goes like back 400,000 years or something. But there's a Turin Papyrus, which is where this is written, and it's in, I think it's even in Turin. But it's they deciphered it on the back of a piece of parchment. So we're lucky we've got that much of it, because it's quite a long story about how that thing came to be. It was falling apart, and they managed to put most of it back together. But there's a couple different sources for that king's list. And not only that, they have cataclysm origin stories. Like the story of Atlantis comes to us from Egypt. That's entirely, the source for that is all in Egypt.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean that's where so Plato, in roughly 200 or 300 BC or thereabouts, he talks about it in the Timaeus and Critias dialogues. That's how we get the story. That's probably the best account we have of Atlantis. That comes from his ancestor Solon, who lived around 600 BC, and he tells the story of when he was in Egypt at a temple up in the Delta. This temple doesn't exist anymore, but it was an Egyptian priest at one of these structures at this temple.
I don't know why I added that extra pause. That was so stupid. Why would I do that?
9,000 years
Whatever.
Ago, so Solomon's 600 BC, 9600 BC, 11,600 years ago. That's the end of the Younger Dryas. It locks right in with meltwater pulse 1b when we know the sea levels rise. So this is the correlation. I think Graham Hancock made it. I don't know if he was the only one or he was the first. I'm not sure who, but this relates to Atlantis. It comes from Egypt, and not only that, but it's also written on the walls of the Edfu Temple. The primeval Djiba story. It doesn't specifically say Atlantis, but it tells a story with Thoth, who it's one of the few sort of Thoth passages. I've got photographs of it actually, and they talk about the primeval land being an island that sank, and then they had to go to the homeland and build these primeval mounds that was where all the temples would be, and beneath these pyramids and a lot of these other structures you have primeval mounds. There's a lot of correlation to this concept of a lost civilization. Call it Atlantis, call it whatever you want, but that's why I think all of this evidence makes sense. So, the Egyptians are connected to it. We've got the evidence of the artifacts for it. And then I think you're also, with the Egyptian iconography, you're looking at that as well, because I do believe there is plenty of evidence that suggests a lot of these statues, not a lot, but certainly several of them, and certainly the very large ones, required significant technology and were beyond the capabilities of what we know about the dynastic Egyptians. So when I make the case for symmetry and precision in these statues, it's a question I sometimes get. It's like, well, how come, if you think these statues are so old, how come they look like Egyptians or dynastic Egyptians? And I think it's the other way around. I really do. I think the dynastic Egyptians modeled themselves and their culture after the stuff they inherited. It's that classic iconography of what we look at and we go, that's a pharaoh. That's if you had inherited that. There's the poem Ozymandias. Is it Percy Shelley who wrote it? It talks about a story of a desert traveller who comes across these two vast and trunkless legs of stone standing in the desert, and nearby he sees a giant visage that's half buried with a sneer of cold command. Like, you imagine coming along in a desert and seeing these legs and the head of this statue that was probably 1,200 tons and 90 feet tall, just broken down, and it's looking at you, and you're like, what the hell is this? I mean, if you had inherited this iconography, you would, and particularly if your culture was connected to it, like the Egyptians say they were, these are your gods, man. Like, these are your gods. And one thing that doesn't really change is in the actual tombs. So with all the beautiful artwork, and you see how the pharaohs depict themselves, that iconography of what they look like doesn't really change over the whole civilization. It's pretty similar. And they always depict themselves as being amongst the gods. The pharaohs were considered god kings, right? So and then generation after generation after generation, they get more powerful and more arrogant, and the hubris of it. So they would start to believe it, I guess, or start to claim these statues. Now, this is me. I'm going to write my name on this statue. I'm going to carve my name into it. And then, this is kind of what happens. These artifacts and the iconography becomes part of that culture and exists for 3,000 years. It becomes tightly integrated into it. These places probably became ceremonial places. So whether or not places like Giza or Saqqara had a functional purpose, Abu Sir for that matter, potentially had a functional purpose that had something to do with an advanced civilization, I think that's a possibility. I think it's worth investigating. But they would have become ceremonial because the dynastic Egyptians might have had a cultural memory of it, but they had no ability to do anything with it. So it becomes ceremonial. And again, you can make it a correlation of that. So imagine the Younger Dryas happens tomorrow. Touch wood, it doesn't. But if it happens tomorrow, within a couple of generations, wipes out our civilization, within a couple of generations, I mean, we're going to be dancing around campfires, like with black pieces of stone that look like a cell phone. Like we're trying to oh yeah, if we dance around the right way around this fire, this black piece of stone is going to tell me everything. I'll be able to talk to my ancestors. I can get all the data. Like the technology of yesterday becomes a myth and legend and magic, and you try to.
I have no idea who shot me.
I mean, it's plasma TVs are a story you tell around a fire at some point.
Right.
So long-winded explanation for how I do think it's a viable lens through which to try and view our past, like in particularly places like Egypt. I think there's a longer time frame involved.
And then going back to some of the inscriptions that are made on some of this stuff, like especially on the boxes that are inside the pyramids, it's very clear that the hieroglyphs that are carved into those things are much newer than the actual boxes themselves. And the boxes are perfect precision. The lines are straight. The angles are perfect. And then you have these sort of roughly cut, roughly chiseled hieroglyphics, or it looks like they've been vandalized by a much later civilization.
You're back.
Yeah, that's exactly what I think's happened in a few cases. And here's an example. Like this is.
This is a great example.
Yeah, Yusuf and I in the Serapeum with these, which is a site with these 100-ton thereabouts, giant granite boxes, 24 of them thereabouts housed in these underground galleries. Wonderful site. But these boxes, I've looked at them in great detail. A number of them are pretty perfect. Like they've got 90-degree corners, they're flat surfaces, there's straight lines, all these things. I love this image of it because.
And another thing to point out is it's not the high relief.
Yeah, it's carved in.
It's carved in.
Although the Egyptians did do high relief carving eventually, they did good carving as well. But this is a good demonstration of kind of the point that you're making, and that I absolutely agree with. Is I love this image because on the corner, it's tough to see with the light there, but on that corner on the right-hand side, you can see it's actually reflecting the light from the hallway in the stone. Like it's
so smooth.
It's what's smooth and it's polished, and this isn't a natural property of granite. Right? You got to work pretty hard to get a mirror finish on it. And then obviously the people who make it, they can make straight lines, they can make clean corners, but when you get to look at the writing, it's there's no straight lines. It's obviously the work of some dude with a chisel and a hammer.
If you made this box, why would you put this on it?
Yeah, if you were the maker of the box, you'd be pissed.
Yes.
you would be upset. And so to me, it's like, it's two different technologies. Right? So the technology used to make the writing is primitive. It's totally achievable with hand tools. You can knock this out with a hammer and a chisel onto granite, and in places it's even the granite's too smooth where it's skipped over. There's no straight lines. And this illustrates one of the issues with a lot of modern or contemporary sort of Egyptology, which is that the writing is the bedrock of Egyptology. Once we translated hieroglyphs, that the Rosetta Stone, and we were able to sort of start to translate, and that's been a huge science. It's wonderful, actually. It becomes the bedrock of how we date and relate objects and artifacts, because it's whatever was written on them it's not the only way, but whatever's written on these things becomes the primary methodology for how we date them. So if it is written on them, so you have the name of a guy on an artifact, it's just like, well, the inference is therefore that he probably had this thing made for him, and therefore he might have even made the whole site. It's not the only method that's used, but it is a primary one. It's probably the first one they'd go to for dating stuff. And what's interesting, even on this box here, is one of the other issues with this idea is that you actually have an empty shen ring on this box, or a cartouche, which doesn't have a name in it. So it's all carved up, And there's an empty Shen ring in here, and all you have to do is imagine that there's the name of a pharaoh in this Shen ring. And then the history books would say that it was this guy that made this box and probably this whole site, and that's how the whole story of it, that's what ends up in a history textbook.
Yeah.
But it's empty, and we don't know whose name was going in here. I suspect it was whoever was going to pay the priests that ran the place the most, because this box was probably being sold for dedication. Right? This is the priests around this site. We know there were all over the Serapeum. There's, you know, there's little indentations on the walls that have, you know, there were these little limestone or granite steles that you would put in there and have a dedication to yourself, and this was a service was being sold by the priests that were running the place. Like,
right.
It's one of the issues with it, and you know, it goes further. Once you start to see this dichotomy of technology between the artifacts themselves and, you know, and the writing, you start to see it in a lot of places, and this is a great example I like to show people. Right. Yeah, it's a Hyksos Sphinx. But you can see that the ribs are kind of being shown up by just the light almost is being used, to the reflection to show that the rib line on this thing. But then you take a close look at the hieroglyphs and they're just crudely chiseled. Like, it's, you know, you see the hammer marks, you see the fact that it's done by hand. And here's another key indicator for me: the hieroglyphs are never polished. Right? So the rest of the stone is polished, and there's obviously, it's not all flat surfaces and easy polishing. There's lots of interesting and tight sort of parts of the stonework that were polished, but the hieroglyphs are never polished. So, you know, for example, if you look at some of these incredible statues that come from the Old Kingdom, you know, you have the top of the chest, the clavicle here is all beautifully done. You have the fingernails, the cuticles, the insides of the fingernails. Right, all of that stonework's polished, right? This isn't flat surfaces. So they were capable of polishing stone. Whoever built this statue could polish stone in whatever form they wanted to. There's dust all over this statue, but it is polished. And, you know, you get these beautiful examples of knees. Like, this is one of the best knees in, I mean, this is granodiorite, not for nothing, but incredible musculature and bone structure.
Diorite?
Granodiorite.
Granodiorite. How hard is that stone?
Slightly harder than granite. It's like a mixture between granite and diorite.
And what is the hardest stone on Earth?
Diamond.
And diorite's how far?
Diorite's like a 7.5. So diamond's a 10 on the Mohs scale of hardness. You know, things like hardened steel might be a 6.5, and granite can be a 6.5 to a 7. Some are diorite and flint, and some of the other harder stones, you know, either porphyry or dolerite can go up to like 7.5, 8.
Okay.
Corundum, topaz, things like this are a 9, and we have artifacts made from things like corundum that they were shaping with a 9. I mean, and copper and bronze are like 3 and 4. You know, these are extreme. Marble's like a 3. Calcite's like a 3. This is why a lot of sculpture's done in marble these days.
So the statue of David, is that marble?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, marble. It's much softer than this stuff. Like, incredibly. Yeah, if you're a modern sculptor, you ain't working in granite just because. Like, it's not a good choice. Like, you're going to burn your tools out. It's going to be a nightmare. And
right.
Modern sculptors will know this. But you know, the point is that, again, even with decent hieroglyphs like this, you know, it's not polished, right? Even in the good hieroglyphs that are on the side of this statue, like this, the interior of the bird, not polished. The Shen ring around the king's cartouche there, not straight and not polished. The lotus flower motif below it is polished. Like, so it's like, when this was done with a different technology, potentially done at an entirely different time. So it's difficult to say then that the writing is how we can date and relate this artifact into the story of history. It's entirely possible that this was inherited, we don't know how old it is, and then somebody wrote their name on it later and claimed it. And in fact, we have evidence of that very thing. In fact, here's one more good example of the polish. I like this shot because it shows you the polished stone, and then you can see the chisel marks. This is all this, these hieroglyphs. They're good, but they're all done by hand. You know, and we know that the practice of writings of somebody usurping an artifact, Flinders Petrie called Ramses II the Great Usurper, because people think about him as one of the most powerful kings of ancient Egypt. But he was notorious for writing his name on stuff. This is an example here I can show you real quick. It's like, that's the cartouche of Ramses II right here. This big guy here, it's carved in very deeply. into, and I actually love this photograph, he's carved it deeply into what is a reused section of an obelisk. But look closely at the end here.
Oh yeah, the bird?
He's carving over the top of a pre-existing inscription. So you can see it here where he's blending in. They got quite good at like writing over the top and like blending in his stuff into a pre-existing inscription.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, there's artifacts with 2 or 3 or 4 even different pharaohs' names on them. And Ramses became notorious. He would carve his stuff really deeply because he didn't want other people doing to him what he was doing to others. But you know what I love about this particular picture is you're actually looking at 2 or 3 different reuses of a particular artifact, right? So this piece of stone was originally probably part of an obelisk, right? It's a broken piece of an obelisk. They had a place called Tanis, which is literally was forested with obelisks and columns. And if you've seen obelisks, the ones that have writing on them, the writing's vertical, right? It's not horizontal. It's vertical.
Yes, when the obelisk is standing up.
Right.
Yeah.
So the writing on so this isn't original writing. So not only did this obelisk break,
This thing was originally standing up vertical.
yeah, it's a piece of an obelisk, most likely.
Yeah.
And so it was and they were reused. There's even like these walls that they built at Tanis. I mean, there's a foot from a 1,000-ton statue that's been repurposed into a block in a wall. So they were reusing broken pieces of stones in walls. So not only did they reused it once as a block in a wall, then someone wrote something on it the first time, and then later on, who knows how long later, Ramses II comes along and writes over it again. So this thing's been inherited, renovated, and reused like 2 or 3 different times, and it's written on horizontal. So,
And all the vertical obelisks are written on vertically.
the ones that have writing on them, yes. So it's hard to say, how can you take this cartouche and say, well, Ramses had this block of stone quarried and shipped to the side, and you know, we don't know that. You can't date the stonework. So it's a great example of inheritance and reuse.
What are the people saying that push back against this? It's football season, baby, and you know what time it is. Time to gamble all that hard-earned money on some sports. As a bettor, you demand perfection, and that's where MyBookie delivers. NFL, college football, and a brand new cash-out system give you the options to bet and win all season long. First 2 legs of your parlay already hit, you can cash it out early and place another bet, or sweat it out and let it ride for a chance at an even bigger payday. Join the MyBookie family for an entire season filled with daily odds boosts, same-day parlays, and super contests. And this season, MyBookie has a no-strings-attached cash bonus that lets you deposit and withdraw quick. Use the promo code DJP on a deposit of $50 or more, and you can receive up to $200 cash instantly into your MyBookie account. Bet your deposit amount once, and you're ready to withdraw at any time. Again, that's promo code DJP to claim your cash deposit bonus. You can bet anything, anytime, anywhere, only with MyBookie. Like, how do they defend this when confronted with some of this stuff?
Well, I mean, with the inheritance, I mean, the reuse of stuff, it's not really defended. It's not like trumpeted as a common thing, but it's acknowledged that, yeah, Ramses would reuse stuff, but it's kind of a weird. It's only in certain cases where they have very specific. Oh, okay, we've got 3 names of rulers on this artifact, so therefore this is probably older. He might have renovated this, but they don't. Yeah, they don't really acknowledge it as a possibility for a lot of this stuff, and I think it is. Even the statues, like this, the big statues at Luxor have the names of 2 or 3 different pharaohs on some of them. They just don't. I mean, one of the problems.
I really fucking hate this stupid fucking game.
I hate to use the term, but it's just like mainstream or orthodox Egyptology is that they don't really consider the engineering aspects of the stonework. They don't care about precision or symmetry. They don't care about, you know, the vase scan work, for example, that we've been doing. It's not really factoring into the decision making. You know, they look at who's written on it.
Thanks, buddy. I really thought I was going to survive that. Like, come on.
Say that's where it is.
It's like, come on, man.
I
How many back boosts am I going to get?
How they
So
think
fucking
about this.
dumb.
I mean, for sure they'd probably point to the fact, well, you know, you get the same sort of questions, like where are the tools? And,
Like, I thought for sure I was going to survive.
And all that stuff. I think we're looking at some of the structures. I think we're looking through the lens of thousands and thousands of years of renovation, reuse, remodeling, and then thousands and thousands of years of destruction and quarrying, and you know, it's a really difficult picture to put together, particularly in Egypt, because it's, you know, the people even within their own civilization, they were reusing stuff. But who knows when it started, but they kept reusing and rebuilding and changing the sites. And then for thousands and thousands of years after, they've been used as quarries for stone. People take the stone and they chop it up, and it's all a great source for granite, you know. even during
Where is this
the Egyptian
fucking
civilization, this was happening. Ramses II was quarrying granite from the Middle Pyramid at Giza to go use in some of his other structures at like Lisht and a couple of other places. And it's written on the wall at the pyramid. It's like, I am the quarry master for Ramses II, and we were taking the stone from here because he's the boss, you know.
What was the original stone that was casing like the very outer shell of the pyramids? It was like a very white, shiny stone.
Yeah, so it depends. There's the Great Pyramid and most of the Middle Pyramid was something called Tura limestone. Okay. Yeah. In fact, there's, you know, Mount Nemrut in Turkey is also made from Tura. It's a very hard form of limestone, and yeah, it's very white and pure. So it's not a local stone. They had to get it from a quarry a distance away.
And who stripped all that off?
Well, a lot of it was probably done started really with the Persian occupation, but everybody.
Oh, come on, man.
Anyone that could. It wasn't so the pyramid. The story goes is that there was the pyramid had its casing stones, and they're locked. Like you couldn't get a bar in there to pry, and they're huge. You know, they're like 3, 4. Some of the casing stones are bigger than the other blocks, so some of those might have been 4 or 5 tons. Funnily enough, the Middle Pyramid actually has giant blocks in its construction too, even on the outside, like 50, 60-ton blocks. But the story goes that I think there was an earthquake, and I'm probably going to get the date wrong, and the 400-ish AD, there was a big earthquake. It might have been even earlier than that. But it shook loose a couple of these casing stones. So it either tilted them or it busted one out, and a big shake-up, and some stuff fell off. And then that gave people purchase to like scaffold their way up there and scurry up there and then start prying these things out, and then just like letting them fall, and then it went from there. And you know, it's a valuable stone. It's obviously useful for all sorts of purposes, but one of its main purposes was you could grind it up and make like a plaster out of it. You grind it up, mix it with water, and you make a fine plaster that you can plaster over things and carve into. And I mean, literally the only reason we have a few casing stones still left on the pyramid is because of the piles of quarry rubble. There was 50, 60 feet of quarry rubble pushed up against the base of the pyramid from all of the quarrying activity that covered up the few remaining casing stones that were still at the bottom.
Yeah, what the
Flinders
fuck is
Petrie
this?
always decried this, and he was always admonishing people for this, because he'd said and this is literally like 100 to 130, 40 years ago. At all of these places, he said, does everyone who's anybody has a headstone made from the stuff, like the stone from the pyramid? And every day there's just camel trains and camel trains of people taking the stone all the time. And he actually excavated through the rubble, he found the casing stones, he documented them, and then he reburied them. He's like, if I leave this open, it's gonna be gone, no question. So he reburied it, and he's like, they'll have to work to get to that. So, yeah, I mean, it's just people don't care. Most people are just interested in enriching themselves. They're not that worried about taking the stone. But it's human. It's a human nature thing. But you get to, you know, the Middle Pyramid, the bottom 2 courses, maybe the first, maybe also the second, for sure the first, was cased in granite. Like literally all of those casing stones were granite. The bottom layers, like the bottom 2 layers, it's really cool. In fact, I probably have a picture of it here. Yeah, so this is the bottom pyramid here. So these casing stones are like the same shape as the ones on the other pyramid, but these are granite, and they're huge, and they're perfect. If you walk around the Middle Pyramid, it's littered with these amazing casing stones, and you see this dashed line that's in this.
Yeah.
Why?
That's an attempt to quarry it. In fact, they were looking to split this whole face off it and get to this square block behind it. So this is you see this everywhere on these sites, and people are like, what are those dashed lines? It's quarrying. It's called a wedge and chisel. So you'd you'd use like steel chisels, you'd just hammer away at it, you'd create these divots, and then you'd get wood or something, or you can sometimes use stone too, like flint. But wood was good because you'd pound wood into it and then you'd wet it, and when wood gets wet it swells. So it would provide pressure on the stone, and then you would get a lot of these flint chisels, a steel chisel, and just hammer into these gaps. And what you're trying to do is crack the stone along the line and take a piece. And yeah, I mean, these things were perfect. You know, these casing stones were perfect with their angle, and they're all polished on the outside, and there's tons of it just from quarry rubble.
Talking about the boxes, it's funny. I was reading Chris's book this morning, his first one, Gyges Death Star or Gyges Power Plant, and he was saying how he interviewed he talked to like the guy who ran the biggest granite manufacturing company in the U.S. and he asked them what it would take, what the resources would be to reproduce those massive granite blocks that were basically hollowed out on the inside.
I don't think it's
the guy said it would take at least $2,000 just to quarry it.
No, more than it was 200,000.
That's what I meant. 200,000. Yeah, $200,000 just to quarry it. Another like $50,000 to transport it.
Easy.
And then he was like, it would make no sense for us to hollow out a single piece. We would just take 4 or 5 pieces and we would bolt them all together.
That's right.
He's like, we would never just hollow it out.
They couldn't. Well, you'd need to develop the tool. Like modern granite processing, we cut slabs. You know?
Right.
Quarry them out.
The force stuck is just so. I don't know. I mean, it was a shit reaction, but it's just so slow.
When you talk about doing granite sculpture, which happens, people do like complex shapes in granite. It takes very specific tools. And man, hollowing out a single piece of granite like that would cost a bomb in the tooling to make that happen. You burn out half tools trying to do. That's a big volume of space. But yeah, and remember these prices are like, I mean, when did you write that book? The 90s? I mean,
right.
You know, so that's got prices probably double that easy since then.
And then the saw cuts too, like the saw cuts, then the errors in the saw cuts. Like if you take a skill saw and you're trying to cut something and you go into it and you realize, oh, you got the angle wrong. You pull it out real quick and then you go back in and make another cut. Mm-hmm. There's evidence for this.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it slowly with whatever methods they have, they claim they had to cut those stones, you wouldn't be going the wrong way, then pull back out and then start going the right way. You would obviously be going so slow that you would be able to make adjustments along the way.
That's right, and there's plenty of evidence for overcuts, and exactly that type of thing is one of the reasons why I think, look, that we're seeing evidence for, call them power tools, call them just powerful tools that were cutting incredibly hard stone. And that's one of the best. I have. We can look at some of those images if you like of tooling. I mean, not just cuts. You see these cuts all over the place. I don't know if this is all broken up stone now, but there's these types of things you see all over it at this is on the basalt pavement. But one of my favourite ones is actually, I really like the edge of this thing. It's a slab at Abu Sir. It's this beautiful slab. And if you look along the edge, it's been like just finely touched with some sort of powerful tool that's sort of been backed out. It's got, this thing's got markings all over. You have these giant circular saw depressions here and here.
Oh, Lord.
You can look at how many times this thing's been touched on.
What is this made of?
This is, I think it's schist. I think it's schist, or it's blue quartzite maybe. It's a very unique piece. I'm amazed it's still there because a couple of people could probably move it. And it's just a remarkable piece of stone. Let's see where else you got.
It's pretty fast.
So just pointing out
it's not. Man, that force stuck is so slow, man.
Show people. And it was actually, so it was cut right through here at the end and then snapped off. You can see that on the end here. Mm-hmm. Cut straight through. Here's some other looks at the circular saw marks on this thing. Absolutely amazing tooling marks in this. And
perfectly straight.
Yeah, and you have, let me look, I think it's in statues. I want to show you the overcuts. Yeah, I mean, you have stuff like this, right? So this is at Karnak Temple. I just did a video on this. This is in an obelisk, and you literally have circular saw overcuts, and you see them on statues too. But you can literally see on this one here where it was exactly what you were talking about. Like,
you see right there, yeah.
It was reset, like the angle of the cut was reset.
Yep.
And it was some sort of giant circular saw because they start narrow. They start here and they penetrate and they get deeper. And then they peter out at the bottom. Like the profile fits a big circular saw. And in fact, there's some more of these at Karnak, and I do this in the video, but I've plumbed them with like a key card where you know, you can show the depth increasing, show the profile of a circular saw cut.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's...
So the depth varies from the middle being the deepest, and then it gets shallower towards the ends.
Yeah, I mean, this is a classic example of a circular saw cut. You see this here, right? I mean, it's just... It's hard to... They had straight saws too. I should say that. It's not all circular saws. There was absolutely straight saws too. This piece is very interesting. This is at a place called Aberril. If Chris Dunn does talk about this in his book, a lot of people have talked about this. I think even maybe Petrie talked about it. But you see how you clearly can see the orientation of the saw, right? Here's the crazy thing to think about this piece. It's concave. See this line in the center here? You can actually see it here. See this curve?
Yes.
So it's shaped like this. It's concave. So it's cut this way, and it seems to have been cut this way. So it's not straight. So what I think you're looking at is a two-stage machining process here, where they cut, and this is where that concavity ends here. Like you can see, it gets deeper and then shallows out.
Yep.
So they cut it sideways through this, and then it's almost as if they ran a circular saw this way, and they just pushed the block through like this, so it was digging out that profile as it went through. But there's this, it's hard to see in the photos, but it's entirely there. And again, you see the striations in the stone from the cutting mechanism.
Right, the little grooves.
This is in very sophisticated machining in stone. Like, I don't know what the purpose was for this, whether this was, it could have been part of a box. They didn't cut all the way through the stone. I don't know. It's just good stuff like that. I mean...
We're blowing Steven's mind right now.
I mean, I've got endless examples of this, and I like this one too. But you can see it's just been, and you actually look close to, you can actually see the striations, like the individual cut lines. So it gets really interesting with this because, you know, these...
Dude, I appreciate you being here. I really do.
And again, basalt
but I stream at this time, literally all the time, always.
Are in what is basalt pavements to this, and it's on the sides because
like it's like I always I mean I don't always just only stream at this time, but this is probably the most common time I stream.
But over the years,
but it's all good. Thanks, man. Thanks for being here, dude.
It's been falling apart. In
Appreciate
fact, they even built back in the day. They built a road. They had a road. They literally
like I'm not like upset or anything.
They've taken the
But
road
yeah,
away now.
it's like 9:30, 9:50.
Where it's falling apart, you can see where they were rough shaping the block.
I guess I have been streaming earlier.
There was different types of tools. It seems to me. The quarry.
But
there was the
appreciate you here, man.
in the quarry. They were looking to remove stone quickly, and they didn't care. It wasn't precise. They're like scooping stuff out to get out as much material as possible, so they can get the block out.
From the other side of the world.
Rough shaping of stone, where they were cutting out the kind of the general dimensions of the block, and we might be looking at that with this, where they're just cutting on the side, and okay, we want to...
You're right, I have been streaming earlier,
and then there
last
was a
little while,
capability
but
to just perfectly finish the
I
stone,
stream
like
into the
fine
night.
polishing, fine
Usually if I
machining,
can
doing those fine little
stream for like
touches to
2-3
get
hours, I
those
stream in the
surfaces,
night.
and then a polish to make it kind of like that mirror finish. So there's different levels, and these were done in different places.
Hey man, I'm glad it works out for you, dude.
And what's interesting with the stone cutting is that we don't have a good explanation for this. It's there's tube drilling kind of falls under this too, but the stone cutting is like the explanation is that it was grinding with like a copper drag saw, you'd call it. Like it's like a V-shaped copper bar. You put sand and water and you grind and grind and grind. So you just sit there and grind and grind and grind. And the problem with that is that it doesn't leave.
There's videos of this, right?
Yeah.
Trying to do this.
Mark Lehner and it's I mean it's a good experiment. There's nothing wrong with the experiment. So Mark Lehner and the guy named Dennis Stocks. Mark Lehner's a famous Egyptologist. Dennis Stocks is an experimental Egyptologist who does actually do these sort of experiments, and it's great because we get some data from his work. But there's a few problems with it. One is it doesn't leave the same signature. Secondly, you don't get overcuts.
I hear you, bro. I totally understand that, dude.
You're not going to get this sort of stuff with that because it's V-shaped, right? And based on that data, though, from Dennis and other people, we have data on how long it takes to do this, and it's something like let's round it off and say I think it's a little tiny bit over, but about 2 millimeters per hour.
With that grinding technique?
Yeah, and that varies based on the length of the cut. Obviously, the longer the cut, the slower you go. So 2 millimeters, roughly 2.5 or whatever millimeters per hour. It's very, very slow is the takeaway. And at the same time, you lose copper. Like the grinding, because it's the quartz sand that's doing the cutting, the copper's kind of, you could use horn or potentially even wood, but even using copper, you lose copper at a tremendous rate. So you lose almost as much, if not more copper than you're actually getting from cutting the stone. And it's a very slow rate. So with that slow rate, you'd have to grind away for hours to get these sort of overcuts that we see. The starter. So it's again, as you said, you're probably not going to
tragic.
You're probably not going to make that mistake and sit there and keep doing that mistake for hours and hours to get an overcut. Like, all right, Johnson, you're in trouble. Like, and secondly, I have yet to do the math, but I plan on. I'd love to do this. I've said it a few times now, but I want to scale this up to see what is at an industrial scale. Can the stuff? Because we know you can kind of calculate how many blocks, how much granite was cut. You can probably get to a rough figure of how much tonnage of granite, say just at Giza, or maybe just on the Middle Pyramid complex. I don't know. Okay. But Chris Dunn kind of calculated it. Just to give you an example, there's a box inside the Middle Pyramid, right? There's a box in the room, kind of like the box in the King's Chamber. It's a little bigger, a little longer, like maybe 8 feet long and 3 or 4 feet wide. And based on Dennis Stocks' experiments, purely to make the primary cuts on that block of granite.
Wow, that was blessed.
The granite takes
the guy should have reacted
but
way
to
worse
make,
than they gave it to me. I have no health though.
To shape the
I have no health. It's not that
using
fast.
The data that we've got from guys like Dennis Stocks would take something like 267 days of continuous grinding, 24 hours a day, just to shape that one box. And that doesn't include hollowing it out, because again, it's a single piece box, right? It's been hollowed out, it's been finished perfectly. You've got tube drills in it. It's all shaped and decorated, and there's who knows how much work in doing that as well. So it's just like, you really think you could scale up and do like hundreds of thousands of tons of granite work using this? And where's all the copper dust?
So bad.
Where is it? Like there's
Such a bad Goldeneye player.
Tons of copper must have been used to do this. And yeah, so
didn't they analyze that famous core, Petrie's core? And I think in Chris's book, I think I read this also, where they took a modern day tube drill.
Such a bad Goldeneye player.
Based on the rings going around the outer
that was terrible.
Tube, the core that came out, that they estimated that the drill would have been 500 times more powerful than anything.
So based on, so in fact, this is Petrie's core. I've got another image of it here. Let's see. No, that's not it. This one, same thing. Let's go. Okay, so yeah, that's Petrie's core number 7 there. So so Petrie, and it's called Petrie's core number 7 because Flinders Petrie discovered it, and it's exhibit number 7 on his. And this is the one that's been studied. So he looked at it, and he determined that this spiral groove that's on the stone has what you'd call a 1 in 60 penetration rate, right? So if you take that, if you unwind that spiral travel, stick it out in a straight line. For every 60 inches of horizontal travel, you're getting an inch of vertical travel in 1 in 60.
Right, okay.
Chris Dunn has since, I think, refined that a bit. It's not quite as deep. It's a little less than 1 in 60. It's in the ballpark. And yeah, so based, and then when you compare that to our modern tools, that's it essentially rounds out to being about 500 times greater penetration rate into stone than we can achieve. And that's not to say that it may have moved very slowly doing this, or our stuff spins really fast, so it's not penetrating it as fast per, you don't get a 1 in 60 penetration rate, but our stuff can still maybe cut the stone pretty quickly, but the actual penetration rate based on the motion of the drill isn't anything like what we're seeing in the stone here, which is crazy. And there are a number of these cores. I've talked a lot about this core, as is Chris, and I'm sure when you get Chris in, he'll talk about it too. But I consider the case is closed, bro. Like they did a latex mold of it, and he has proven without any doubt that it's a spiral groove. The problem has always been the claim that it's a spiral groove. That's the one thing that no one in, I guess, mainstream Egyptology will admit, and they go to great lengths to try and obfuscate this idea that it's a spiral groove. But it has been definitively proved by the Petrie Museum, no less, and Chris Dunn, who were both responsible for the latex core experiment, which is this one. So they made it. In fact, they made a latex core of it, right? So this is this latex mold. Chris stamped the latex mold with these notches, cut it open with these notches, and then here's just showing you the notch detail and these blow-ups next to these little arrows, right? So you can draw a straight line between these notches, which is the horizontal line, okay? The straight lines are the horizontal line between the notches, same spot. So it goes to the bottom of the notch, it goes to the bottom of the notch, same down here, bottom of the notch. And then what you're seeing is these dotted lines are tracing the individual spiral or individual grooves. And in every case that we look at here, it starts above the line and it ends up below the line. So it is spiral, right? So it's higher here, it's lower here. It's higher here, it's lower here, etc., etc. It's geometrically proves this is a spiral groove. That said,
and the length between each groove is exactly the same.
The width.
Oh, that's what I meant. Yeah.
Not really. It seems it's Petrie described it as a drunken screw. There are some crossover. It seems to have been more than one cutting point. So there was multiple cutting points. So there might have been some crossover. And you know, people speculate all day about this. It is, and the other thing to note about this is that it's actually tapered. So it's tough to see. You can kind of see it. See how it's tapered?
Right. Yep.
Right. So it narrows down, and this thing's upside down. So this is probably where it's fatter at the bottom. It's upside down. It snaps off here. And so you got to imagine that the holes that they come out of are straight, right? And it's tapered. So it tells us that the tool itself was probably tapered. Right. Which means that it's shaped like this. So as it goes down, it's cutting down. It's cutting down. It's cutting down. It's cutting on all surfaces. And then, so a lot of this is where people say, well, you know, this groove could have been made when they retracted the tool, like it unscrewed itself. I'm like, that isn't how it would work if it was tapered. So if it's tapered, it's going to conform to the granite's conforming to the shape of the tool, and the second you move it up at all, it loses contact with the stone because it's the angle changes, right? It's narrower at the top and it's wider at the bottom. So once you get down and you're finished, you lift it up a bit, and then all of a sudden the tool's going to be wider right at that point when you lift it up. So it's not actually touching the stone. It doesn't unscrew. It just lifts out. It can't. I don't think unscrewing it or removing the tool will give you the spiral groove. Plus, look, it takes quite a lot of force to cut into granite like this. It's not just a simple. You're not scratching granite and leaving a deep groove like we see in these tubes. It's not just in the. It's not just in the drills, but we see it in these holes too. You have these deep grooves in the holes, and you see this all over the place with many.
Now, is that an example of like them doing a core drill used to split a piece of stone?
Well, I don't think it's used to split a piece of stone so much as they were sought out to then split stone. You know what I'm saying? Like they were. I think the people that were quarrying the blocks were looking for these, and then they would try and split them along the angle of the tube drill. You know, so along the axis of the tube drill. You see it all. There's lots of complete holes like that haven't been split, and in fact, you see on the back of the stones, you see that dashed line, which is a. I mean, that's a technique that started. I mean, they were the earliest. We know they were using it in like the New Kingdom, but these tube drill holes go back way further, and the oldest types we don't see that quarrying method way back in the day. It's like the oldest quarrying method seems to be the scoop method at the quarry, which is kind
of like an ice cream scoop.
Yeah. But I think they were looking for them. Like, for example, here's a giant tube drill. Right? This is a 9-inch one at Karnak, and this stone's been split along its axis.
Right. So later civilizations found these things and used that to start.
Yeah, because it's a natural weakness in the stone, and you can split them. So you see a lot of tube drills that are in fact split. But you see plenty that are whole as well, and when we know they're whole originally because we have the drill cores.
Can we look at some pictures of these scoop marks?
Yeah. No, actually, this is a good point. Yeah,
Please.
Let's just go straight to that.
And also, I forgot to ask you, what do you speculate that these saw blades could have been made of?
Pretty good.
It's less maybe what they were made of than what technology they were using. I mean, you know, Petrie speculated that it could have been. He's like, diamond would fit the bill, you know, like it's because he was looking at a bronze embedded with gemstones or something. But he's like, there's no evidence for diamond use. And he's right, there's no evidence for diamond use in Egypt. We see no diamonds. It's not written about.
Would there be leftover fragments of diamonds?
Maybe you find something. There's literally been zero. And as far as gemstones go, the dynastic Egyptians sort of prized coloured stones. So diamonds wouldn't have been precious from that perspective. I mean, who knows? Maybe they did use them. We just don't have any evidence for it. But I don't know what it was using. It could any corundum or hardened substance, but it could have, like, I look at this stuff, I don't think there was pure mechanical force involved. I think there's something else going on.
Like how?
Well, that's the speculation.
From the stones?
There's, who knows? Were they changing the molecular properties of the stone? Were they using ultrasonics? Were they, I mean, you have to go back to the legends.
Plasmoids?
Have you ever heard of, well, it could have been plasmoids. I don't know. I mean, this is where we speculate. That's why I think it's interesting to be open-minded about what we see on these sites and research it as best we can. Let's use our best tools. Let's microscopically analyze the rock. Let's look at it with being open-minded to any possibility, because we might learn something.
The glass did not open.
You go back in time, the legend of the Shamir is very interesting. You ever heard this story? Like the Solomon's Temple.
I guess, as you know.
So it's, well, the Shamir, I'm not that well versed in this. You should really have.
Yeah, the glass didn't open,
Kyle,
my man.
Those guys.
Snake Bros. Like,
It's all good, though.
Yeah,
that would be great.
To reach out to those guys.
Fantastic. And Russ really knows this stuff inside out. But so there's stories in, I think it's associated with King Solomon, about the stories of something called a Shamir, which
no worries, man. No stress.
Think of
dude.
it as like a lightsaber.
No
that just cuts
stress.
through stone. Lets people cut through very hard
my
stone.
gosh.
It's sometimes described as a worm.
There's no test.
But there's this consistent
There's
story
no
of this
exam at
artifact
the
called
end.
a Shamir that is like allegedly would let you. Yeah, I like to think.
I know
it was like
people
this
also,
lightsaber that
like,
cuts through
they just
stone.
come in at the end of the run or
People
whatever if they're doing whatever they're doing in their life.
Was this left over from these times? I don't know. I don't know. And I try not.
Thinking about it in terms of diamond blades, though, is like, it's like thinking about it, looking in the mirror, like.
But yeah, that
like,
would have
we
been
can't
rough.
Assume that they
It was
did
rough.
shit the way that we do shit, right? This is the
Really
way we talk about
demoralizing.
it.
Very demoralizing.
Yeah, it is, and I think that's the right approach. Like it's a tempting and natural thing to look at a problem. We look at these challenges and we go.
But I mean, these are also
This is how we would do it. Fit it into our box.
some of these are forced stuffs,
Again,
right?
I just think that
So
there's
it's not.
avenues of technology that we are
I
yet
don't
to
know.
learn about.
I
That
just-
we will know more
I'm losing
about
my
in
mind.
time. And I think
the
it's
natural
hard
stuff,
to do,
I'm
but it's
losing my
like
mind.
here's our perspective and here's everything we know, but some of the answers might be out here. Like it's just, and that's what being open-minded about it and not just dismissing stuff
Right.
and scoffing at it, and then researching it with some of those possibilities in mind. We might even learn something eventually from it. That's what I want to do. People always like, well, what is it and what's a speculation and how it does. And you can speculate all over the place. Chris Dunn's new book, if you've got to it, the Serapeum chapter.
Yeah, I'm like a quarter way through it. I gotta finish it. Like, yeah.
He does some amazing speculation. I'm not going to spoil it.
Really?
Oh, God, I love it. He sent me the Serapeum chapter because I'd helped him with some stuff for it before he wrote it, and I'm writing a recommendation for it. So I've got the book too. It comes out early next New Year.
Right.
New Year,
January or something?
January 24th. Yeah, for people.
Get them salts, baby.
And then, and he does. I love where he goes with it. But it's with speculation. The world. It's an imagination at that point.
Does he talk about these lightsabers?
I haven't seen him mention specifically the Shamir. He's talking more about a potential technological application for the boxes.
Oh, a technological application.
Yeah,
so that's something I've always thought about too. Yeah.
So here's another way to think of it, and I like this idea too, is that, and because this relates to, he does talk about this, and this isn't giving the game away here, but it's like if you consider the idea, you heard of like the concept of an assembler.
An assembler?
Assembler. Like this is, imagine we get nanotech down to the point. And this is entirely plausible if you just project technology forward, where you create these microscopic machines that can essentially assemble themselves, or they're almost like a von Neumann probe or something like that, but at the tiniest level, where you can use molecular
Low lag
yeah, it's
run.
like a self-replicating probe. Imagine you send, some interesting books been written on that topic. Yeah, it's like you send a probe out into
Why?
space, but
Like,
it has
what
the
the
capability to
fuck,
replicate
man?
itself, and just by using the material that it finds, and then project forward 1,000 years and see what happens. But imagine you get to the point where we have these microscopic machines that they're assemblers that can take molecular material, even at the atomic level, and assemble things, and even replicate themselves. So you could build anything, but it's being done with technology that's so small you can't see it. Right? That's this concept. It's been proposed by a number of sci-fi authors and people that have thought about technology.
Yeah.
And it's like that's one scale of things, and the other scale of things to think about as well. If you go out and you think about Dyson spheres and things like that are almost galactic in scope, or the size of a solar system in terms of a machine that does a particular thing. It's just an interesting way of thinking and looking at technology. We look at it and we go, here's a box, and how would we cut this box and make this box? But it's possible. Whether it's plausible or not, I don't know, but it's possible that the answers to some of these questions could be so small we can't see them, or so large we can't comprehend them. Like, that's just the nature of technology. Like, we just don't, you can throw simulation theory into that too, the idea that we're all just part of some simulation running on the computers of the future. But it's just projections of technology, and this is all pure speculation. So that's one of the challenges with speculation, is that it becomes this just endless imagination of possibilities. But I do try to focus on sort of following the evidence and looking at what some of the answers might be based on the evidence that we have in front of us, and it's fun to speculate. And I'm in the process of writing a book too, and I will speculate and give my speculation in there as well about what it might be. But I always try to be real clear about when I'm speculating. Because as soon as you speculate, people are like, look, it's crazy. You think the moon's a spaceship or something.
Oh, yeah, we did. Our last podcast, we were talking about the moon, and somebody took a video and made some crazy reaction video.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, gotta love that React model.
I gotta pee real quick.
All right. They've really figured out, they're construction guys.
Is it two guys?
Russ and Kyle.
Okay.
Yeah. They've really figured out some really cool shit on how some of this architecture might have been made, because these blocks that go around the corners, how in Gyges the blocks kind of go around the corner where they cut and they go around. They're not like cut and there's bricks in the corner, they curve around. But they've sort of worked out how that was probably done, and they have a really good method for showing people. They've made some really astute observations on how the pyramids were built and how these big granite structures were built.
And do those guys go out there a lot?
Go with me, yeah. They come with me next year, and I've taken them out twice. Yeah, the 2 times I've been to Egypt, they went with me. Yeah, so I like to tour with them because we also jam.
Oh, do you really?
Yeah, we play. Those guys are fantastic. Well, particularly Kyle, amazing musician. I use some of it. If you watch that Karnak video, the song at the end. Did you get to the end of it? Like it's
video?
The most recent one, Karnak. Right at the end, there's like a music. There's like a song at the end.
Yeah, the last 10 minutes of it is like a song. Yes, I remember that. Yeah.
That's Kyle's music.
Oh, no shit, really? Okay.
Yeah, but we jam and they're good. They're more they help me to manage the group, and then also, they're just more social and personable than me most of the time.
Yeah.
A bit more serious. I'm happy to have conversations, but those guys are funny and yeah. So it's great. We work together really well.
Yeah, but one of the things, getting back to those boxes, I wonder, was the technology just so hyper advanced that making something that precise wasn't a big deal? If some culture came along a million years from now and be like, how do they make this bottle so perfect and smooth? Not because there was a purpose, just because it was easy. So those boxes, was it just really fucking easy to do that? And the pyramid too, or was it for a specific function? How can you make that box functional?
Well, there is a relation, and I have a long video on precision, and there is, and I said this the other day, I think, to you as well, that there's a relationship between precision and function. You don't develop precision. Developing precision costs money. It costs resources. You only do that for a functional return. And when you look at the development of precision in the modern world, it kind of stems out of the need for old naval cannons to shoot straight. The old days, you would cast a cannon and then fire it while it's hot and go, well, I guess that's the barrel, and hopefully that thing shoots straight now. And then they were like, well, we can make more accurate weapons if we actually, maybe cast it and then carve out and machine it, slowly use a water wheel and turn out, a cannon barrel to make it shoot straighter. And they started to draw that relationship. Then we needed to make chronographers, accurate timepieces. That helped with navigation. Longitude
we talked about longitude earlier, but it's very difficult to measure. Latitude's okay, you can use the sun for that, but longitude, you need accurate timepieces to be able to know where you are on that east-west time frame. And in fact, the way we used to do it, it was you know, you'd go to where you wanted, and we'd basically move in right angles. Like if people would sail to get somewhere based on, you know, navigational maps, it was called like running down a westing or running down an easting. You would get to where you wanted on a latitude and then go that way until you hit what you needed to, because you knew you could head east or west, but you weren't sure how far you had gone. And it wasn't until the end of the 17th century, essentially, that we developed accurate enough timepieces to be able to navigate using longitude effectively. You know, then you know, precision progresses into the industrial age and steam engines and the need to create containment vessels for pressure, and you know, and that's now in the modern world we've got, you know, 7 Newton meter processes that we're developing, you know, silicon on, and you're packing millions and millions of transistors and complex logical circuitry into a tiny little footprint. But that costs billions of dollars to do, and we do it because there's a functional return on it. So a long way around of saying that you develop precision when you're chasing a particular functional return. And I think it's one of the indications to me when you look at some of these precision objects, particularly the more like the regular ones. The boxes are a good example. I think they were functional, and potentially some of the structures and even the sites were functional. And I think in order to get that functional return, they needed to make these things with precision. Now, in terms of the bottle that we looked at and industrial design, once you have a manufacturing system that supports precision, precision's what you get. Like today, you buy a toaster, it's going to be industrial designed on a computer, and it's going to be made in a manufacturing system that is just by its nature very precise. Like it's all, you know, there's no panel gaps on it. I mean, cars, look at the panel gaps between different panels on cars today versus in the 1960s. It's much better. Like